this is kind of a spicy topic, and we'll try to sanitize the more controversial components, but I think it's a discussion that's interesting, and I haven't commented on this. I'm not sure if you have either. But Nathan J. Robinson of Current Affairs, he posted an article. Two articles. This is spicy, it is. So the first article that he posted was, "Isn't right-wing populism just fascism?" And he kind of directly takes a shot at Rising on the Hill over a book that I actually have.
Okay. How is it?
And so I haven't read it yet. I bought it because I really like Crystal Ball. I think she's sharp. But part of the reason why I bought this is because apparently there's an explanation of what the new right is. Now, my understanding, maybe this is too simplistic, is that right-wing populism isn't a thing. Like, I have never thought of populism in terms of right-wing or left-wing. It's just whatever is popular, mostly economic policy, right? So I don't know what right-wing populism means. To me, I always thought, if you're a right-wing populist, that's usually, you're just a fascist. So I was hoping to kind of get an explanation, and I haven't read it yet. So maybe Sagar goes on to explain what he means by the new right and right-wing populism. But Nathan J. Robinson's argument basically is that he doesn't really lay that out. And so right-wing populism is essentially just fascism, because think about who we see as right-wing, quote-unquote, populists. You know, Jair Bolsonaro. Yeah, Tucker Carlson. Yeah. Donald Trump. And they're all fascists. So the question is, you know, is right-wing populism a thing? And how does the left respond to that? Because his argument is kind of directed at Crystal Ball in the sense that he thinks that she's kind of enabling this type of fascism by, one, not challenging it, and two, by kind of sanitizing it, right? Because Nathan J. Robinson admits that he agrees with what Sagar is saying 80% of the time. But the thing is that, you know, if you allow yourself to just talk about discussions where you agree, where if you narrow that parameters, you're kind of not really getting the full sense of that person and how problematic they may be. So for like an extreme example, if I were to talk to David Duke about just cats and food, I'm sure that, you know, it would seem...
love to see that conversation. It would be so weird.
It'd be a little scary because he scares me.
I don't like black cats, I'll tell you.
Totally. No, like if we had a conversation about that, you know, it'd be benign. I wouldn't know that he's a white supremacist. We'd agree seemingly on everything. But if we, you know, widen that scope and we started talking about identity politics, you know, politics in general, then it would be problematic. So, you know, the argument, not to kind of put words in Nathan J. Robinson's mouth, but what I took away from this is that Crystal Ball is kind of helping to present this fake illusion of, you know, right-wing populism, when in actuality it's not a real thing. It's just fascism, and we shouldn't enable these people. Now, I don't know what the implication is. I don't know if he thinks that, like, we should kick Sagar off of the hill. I don't think that's what he's implying. Maybe he just wants Crystal Ball to challenge him more. But I thought that it was a thought-provoking piece, because this is something that I've kind of grappled with. Like, I'm not sure how many people remember this, but back in, was it 2018 or 2019, me and Kyle Kulinski kind of had a similar discussion on the Progressive Voice show, but about Joe Rogan, right? And, you know, whether or not he is acceptable, you know, because I take issue with his stance on trans rights and whatnot.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know,
it's probably his most problematic thing.
Absolutely.
I kind of feel he's, I'm not going to get too derailed with this, but he's kind of a Rorschach test for whoever his guest is. Because I find when he has Cornel West on the show, you will have just an incredible elucidation on the history of socialism, and you'll be in America, and you'll be like, this is a beautiful hour of my life. I'm very happy I spent this time. He has Ben Shapiro on, and he's a transphobic piece of shit. And you're like, oh, well, that was a terrible hour and a half. I'll never get back, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like a Dave Rubin, but not as bad as Dave Rubin. Like, he pushes back sometimes, like the Candace Owens interview on climate change. That's a great example. I think I even talked about that on my program. But, you know, it's just a matter of, like, how does the left respond? And I think that Kyle Kulinski does make a really solid point in that, you know, if you think that people like Dave Rubin, or excuse me, not Dave Rubin, but Joe Rogan or Crystal Ball are in a way inadvertently offering you a type of, like, pipeline to the alt-right, then, you know, having them, you know, offer left perspectives could potentially be a pipeline out of the alt-right as well. So, you know, it's complicated, and I think this is a really nuanced and somewhat messy subject. And I wanted to get your take on this because I feel like you really have a solid understanding of the alt-right, and you know how people kind of get trapped in that pipeline. So, you know, what is your take on this? Is the left being a little bit too, like, cancel culture-y, or do you think there's actually something there with Nathan J. Robinson's argument?
So, I guess if we took it, what's the classical definition of fascism? You're basically combining economic populism, right? That's what Hitler was doing. So ideas that are very social in origin, where we're talking about socialized medicine, things like that, for example, with right wing or far right conservatism. Combine the two, right? I mean, even far past. I'm not going to call the right wing as far fascist as they were, but so. Are we seeing that in someone like Tucker Carlson? I think even before Tucker Carlson, you were starting to see that with people like, say, Alex Jones,
Mm.
who was constantly talking about, instead of, I mean, they would usually have a couple of dog whistles here, but it would talk about the globalists, right? It's the globalists and the elites, and it's all of them right off in the corner or something like that. He's talking about that, and it's all coded for, the international bankers and in brackets, all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
they're constantly vilifying this idea of there is something external. And I mean, if you're on the left, you'll understand it. It happens to be like, there's no secret to any of this. The people who control the levers of power happen to be the rich, right? The quote unquote elites. We know who they are. You have to look at who's the Fortune 500, right? We know who the billionaires are. We know what they own. We know what assets they have. We know the oil companies, all that kind of stuff. We understand that, but they will try to take that same idea, because everyone experiences alienation, right? Everyone's having trouble finding employment, even worse now with COVID, 40 million extra Americans unemployed. But you've got this idea where everyone is experiencing this alienation. And now we've got this section of the right that's tapping into those same kind of things and selling them and repackaging them with right-wing populism as well. And that's what sorry, I know right-wing populism isn't a thing. I agree with your statement there, right? But that's what I would say is quote unquote right-wing populism. And in the case of Crystal Ball, and during Bernie Sanders' campaign, I was a huge fan of her, and it was really nice seeing maybe just like a mainstream Sunday morning, like Good Morning America style show that was actually talking about points with Bernie Sanders, right? Whereas now I cannot stand it. Like even if I hear that little jingle, that like, I actually get like a visceral, like fearful, like I can feel my skin crawling, because I think it's come out now at this point. I think one of the biggest producers or founders on the show happens to be deeply invested in the oil companies of the US. And I've read a number of articles. I think even The Intercept did an article on this, how the Hill exists to kind of sow dissemination between the progressive movement and the liberal movement of the United States. So there might be an argument there. I'm not going to go too tinfoil hat. I was just making fun of Alex Jones 2 seconds ago, right? But but the idea then that we have this show in which she's starting to say, and I noticed she was saying this a lot before she got called out on it, that Tucker Carlson is right about this. And it usually starts with that preface, right? Like, I just want to say this. He's an awful person, all right? He's a white nationalist. We get it. He's a mouthpiece. But he's not wrong about blank. And there seem to be a lot of those segments, right? And Tucker was actually right about this. Tucker's right about this. And yes, he's a bad person, but it is true that there is these global elites that control the levers of power. And to Crystal Ball, I'm sure she thinks that it's the rich. I'm sure she thinks that it's, again, the elites actually are who the elites are, right? Like I said, the millionaires, the billionaires who control most of the levers of power in the United States. But you can't repackage what Tucker says for the left. That's where the danger comes in, and that's what I would agree with this idea. And maybe that is, I read Nathan J. Robinson's article. I haven't read the book that you have in your hands, but that's where I agree with Nathan, that you can't normalize Tucker and his ideas. You have to consistently call them out for what they are, because otherwise it's very insidious.
Yeah, and one of the issues that Nathan J. Robinson also brings up is that there's this explicit assumption in the book that it would be beneficial for the left if we teamed up with the right. If the populist left and the populist right kind of form this, economic alliance, then we can get a lot of things done. And I think that that is something that I unequivocally reject, because I think
absolutely.
that if you want to form a coalition, that makes sense. We need a rainbow coalition. I think that Fred Hampton kind of, he led the way on that, but it has to be an anti-racist coalition, because you can't disaggregate, the race issues from the class issues. So you can't throw people of color and trans people under a bus and say, well, we're going to team up with them for these economic issues, but you're going to have to wait by the side. Like, it doesn't work that way, because these things are inextricably linked. So that's one of the things that, had I read the book, I would have also been turned off by that, because I absolutely don't like this notion of teaming up with, the populist right, because I don't think that there is a populist right. And I am glad that you brought up the Tucker Carlson thing. Like, he's a bad person, but like, that still normalizes someone who is very clearly a white supremacist. And, by trying to point out the good point that he makes, and since he's so nefarious, it's great that he made a good point, positive reinforcement. Sure, I believe in positive reinforcement, but this is an actor who's very intelligent, who knows exactly what he's doing. He throws you a couple of crumbs with regard to economic issues, but if you accept what he has, once he gets you in, then you're pulled into a very nefarious, explicitly white supremacist agenda. And maybe, he doesn't convince you right away, but as you listen to him more because you were hooked by his economic policy statements, well, then maybe, you start opening your mind a little bit more to white supremacy. So I think it's a dangerous path to go down. And I think that there really is, like, I don't want to say that, the show The Rising is awful, because I also watched it a lot, during the primaries, but I think that we do have to be careful as lefties to not allow snakes like, Tucker Carlson to be legitimized by us, either wittingly or unwittingly. And like, part of it is, I feel like it should be just on its face laughable, because you have Sagar Enjeti, who's the co-host of The Hill Rising. He's a Trump supporter, and he rails against neoliberal Democrats. But Trump is a neoliberal. Like, he ran as a populist, but he governs as a neoliberal. So how do you not abandon people who aren't living up to your populist principles? So to me, it seems like a Trojan horse to, the alt-right. And that's why I think that there is something to, Nathan J. Robinson's point here. But I don't want to discount, what
he's not the only
says.
one making that critique either, by the way.
Sure.
It hasn't just been coming from Nathan J. Robinson. I've seen a lot of other figures on the left, not just in relation to Crystal in particular, but just the idea of the left starting to embrace elements of that right-wing populism.
Totally.
Whatever you want to say, quote unquote right-wing populism.
Yeah, and I think we have to reject it, and we have to be very vocal about it, because, if you give them an inch, they take a mile, because they are very, very strategic, and they're savvy. Like, people nowadays, you're not going to find someone just say, hey guys, I'm a Nazi, here's a swastika. Like, they use code words. Like, I think that ContraPoints had a great video.
Right?
Exactly. So I mean, you have to not get duped by them, in other words. But at the same time, I want to bring up Kyle Kalinske, who made a good response video to this, to where he says, you have to acknowledge that the average, like, layperson, the normies, they're not going to necessarily be as keen to these things. And by criticizing people like Crystal Ball, it seems like we're being, like, overly cancelly or whatever. So it's tough. I feel like we're walking a fine line, but there's so much at stake.
I have no desire to cancel her. Like, I don't really say, I'm not a cancel culture person in general, because I don't think it works. I don't think there's such a thing. I think she was aware of it as well, because she apologized. She issued a video, or sorry, I don't know if she directly apologized, but it was more of a just like, I know what everyone's saying. I've read the articles and everything, and to this extent, like, I am not praising Tucker Carlson. He's a horrible person. He's a white nationalist. Let's, like, get that out. It's a non-starter kind of thing.
Yeah, and I will say, just for the record, I like Crystal Ball. I'm not assuming, like, malintent in criticizing, because I've also done horrible things on my channel. It's all about growing, right? We're human beings. We're imperfect. Like, I've platformed H.A. Goodman, and I kind of, like, attribute my channel to his success in a way, and now he's a MAGA chat. So that's something that I really think about. Like, how am I vetting these people who I bring on my channel and whatnot?
To our monarch, Thomas Bone, you are the light that guides our path. To our lords, I'm Raph, Stephen, Nine Tails Cosmic Fox, and Hans Josephine. We bow meekly for your pleasure. To our knights of the round table, Josh Mickelson, Dylan Bythe, Alexander Thaler, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Clement Chutzcott, Sky Bear Games, Moss Beast, Political Puppy, Alan R., Andreas Chitoro, Good Poon Hates Cops, That's Solid Poon Then, we salute you. And to all our merchants and farmers, you have our undying loyalty and love.